Welcome to Giant Sized Violence, an UltraMega podcast. I'm your host, Grant.
And I'm your co-host, the other Grant.
And today, we're once again going to be taking a look at some of the Tokusatsu projects behind UltraMega that may or may not have influenced the book directly, but either way, will definitely appeal to fans of the book because this, at least for me, scratched a very similar itch, and frankly has been one of my biggest obsessions since stumbling across this movie earlier this year.
So this movie is called Mechanical Violator Hakaider, and it's a mashup of 80s action, tokusatsu, and henshin. It's kind of a Robocop meets Terminator with a Kamen Rider skin, and then some religious overtones that play pretty heavily into the antics and adventures of the film.
I think that sums it up pretty concisely there. That's kind of my go-to pitch. I mean, it literally is like a Robocop dystopia where just everyone happens to dress like a Power Ranger for some reason. But for those of you that description hasn't quite sold you, I very much recommend that you right now pause this podcast, go on YouTube, and look up the trailer for Hakaider. Because if this doesn't sell you on the movie, nothing will, but the trailer itself is just perfect 90s B-movie schlock, and it does not sell the movie short one bit. And in fact, it kind of acts like a highlight reel for the movie, so while I fully encourage you to look this up and watch this before listening to the podcast, I think you'll be fine if you just see the trailer, because it gets what you need across pretty well, in my opinion. Now, one thing I love about the trailer in particular, too, and it's something I love showing other people, is just that it keeps using all these terms throwing out there that I could have sworn was just trying to appeal to all the edgy 90s kids, like
satanic evil.
Yeah, it keeps throwing out words just like satanic evil or robotic justice. Treason? And just word after word like this. I'm like, okay, yeah, you're just trying to get all these edge words that love The Crow to pick up this movie, give it a shot. But no, as we looked this up and watched the sketchiest rip of it on YouTube my first time through, we slowly but surely realized every single one of those terms was absolutely in the movie. So this was not false advertising here. That was all there.
And they're not just in the movie, but it's what the movie's all about. They weren't kidding about satanic evil.
Oh, yeah. I really can't wait to pick apart some of the wild religious symbolism we see in this film.
Well, before we get into what actually happens in the movie and all of the crazy things that go on, let's talk a little bit about how we found this in the first place.
Yeah, so people who have listened to the other episodes of the podcast have maybe heard me reference the film Psycho Goreman once or twice, which is another one of my favorite movies to show people from the last couple of years, that also has some toku themes, a lot of people in costumes and miniatures, practical effects and such. I discovered this similar to how I kind of got sold on Psycho Goreman. I was in a Barnes & Noble and saw a issue of Fangoria on the shelf, which is kind of an underground horror magazine that's gone for quite a while and has recently kind of come back to life after being out of print, I believe. But yeah, it had this article on Psycho Goreman with the director that went to depth on that film and really made me want to check that out. But in their line of questioning, they asked about influences on that movie, and specifically the way their villains look, having this like robotic and also angelic appearance, and having kind of the villain seem like the good guy. And they're like, oh yeah, Mechanical Violator Hakaider was a major influence. And they maybe had one image of the film that caught my interest, but I started asking around, looking into it, and just kept hearing about how this was apparently just some hyper-violent toku film, really dark and dystopian, but not many people had seen it. And then once I found this trailer, I watched it with a friend, we're like, oh my god, we need to see this movie immediately. And the next video recommended was like this 80-minute rip of the VHS tape right onto YouTube. Poor dub, poor quality, but it actually kind of increased the charm of this kind of B-movie, I think. So watched through it, loved it, and I've seen this thing at least 3 or 4 times since, just because I've loved to see other people's reaction at just how crazy this thing gets.
And as is a running theme on this podcast, I actually found out about this from you. It was probably your second or third watch through. We saw it together. I've seen it a few more times since then.
Yeah, and I'd really like to throw it out there that I think this movie appeals to the same people that would be drawn to UltraMega, just because it shares a lot of the same themes and visual elements. I mean, it's also a kind of post-apocalyptic dystopia featuring tokusatsu. It has a bit of a role reversal with the heroes and villains, or at least tries to play with some of the tropes and rules that we normally see in these movies and shows. And also has a drastic reimagining of a classic toku character, which it kind of leads me to the bit of the rabbit hole that is Hakaider. Because at first I saw this and just thought it was, Hakaider was the cool, dark robot villain they happened to make for this. But no, it turns out this is kind of like Japan's equivalent of something like Venom or Joker. In that Hakaider was actually a villain from an old 70s toku show called Android Kikaider, which also happens to be created by Shotaro Ishinomori, the guy we previously talked about who made Kamen Rider and Super Sentai. So yeah, this is a reimagining of a classic villain character, not really tied to the original property at all. It's a complete reimagining of the world and the character. The religious themes are all a new addition, and the old version is nowhere near this violent. But still, I really like seeing that even in Japan, they can take their cult classic villain characters and create an entirely new and interesting movie reimagining those characters.
All right, I think we should kick off the plot synopsis.
An ancient robotic evil, known as Hakaider, is released from a forgotten prison and immediately sets out to take revenge on his creator with his own brand of violent justice. Unfortunately, his creator, Gurdjieff, happens to be the angelic dictator of a dystopian futuristic city covered in armored troops and a mind-controlled populace, as well as a new and improved mechanical peacekeeper, Michael. Hakaider slowly but surely kills his way through Gurdjieff's forces and teams up with an ill-fated love interest among a group of colorful LGBT light rebels fighting against the system. We find out there's more to Hakaider than just a killing machine fighting in the name of free will, as he goes toe-to-toe with increasingly powerful threats, ultimately culminating in the longest and loudest robot fight you've ever seen.
So to lay out some of the setting and the characters for this movie, first off we have the big bad, Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff is an angel, specifically a one-winged angel, and I think they're trying to play in with some of the religious iconography where a one-winged angel symbolizes a fallen angel. So despite being an angel, he's a seriously bad dude.
Yeah, and I want to point out that this movie has 2 one-wing angel characters, and yet predates Final Fantasy VII by 2 years. So this is not them just ripping off Sephiroth here. This is them playing with the one-wing angel well before they made it cool.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I actually thought while watching the movie that Final Fantasy is somehow what inspired it, but yeah, it actually came before.
I'd agree with you of what they're probably going for with the one-wing symbology on Gurdjieff. I do really want to know what they're going for with the random dead vulture on his shoulder that kind of balances out the one wing. They never draw any attention to it or say anything about it, but yeah, this guy just goes around his polished future dystopia city with a dead bird on his shoulder, acting like that's a normal thing to do.
It's called fashion, sweetie. Look it up.
Now, our other one-wing angel character we have here is Michael, his right-hand man, or man droid. That's obviously named after the Archangel himself and made in Gurdjieff/God's own image. And I really love the design of this character. I mean, we've mentioned Robocop a few times, but this one really is like the Christian knockoff of Robocop, or Bible Man meets Robocop, if you will. And just his presence is always just really awesome. I love what they do with him, like being both the forgiving good guy of justice, yet also being kind of sadistic and ruthless in other scenes as the movie progresses.
Yeah, and also the way that the characters of Gurdjieff and Michael look versus how Hakaider looks is kind of confusing in a fun way. I mean, Hakaider's all black and has some strange lines and maybe like some cephalopod, like octopus or squid things going on with the design. He kind of looks like a bad guy, despite being our anti-hero protagonist, whereas Gurdjieff has fluffy white wings and is dressed all in white and gold, and Michael is this sleek, clean-looking android that's all white and silver.
Yeah, and I like what they're doing. Like, I can tell it's kind of leaning into that, like, it's leaning into the religious imagery for sure here, and I wish I could say it's subtle, but the truth is, the dystopian, futuristic city in which this all takes place is literally called Jesus Town. And they say the name of this city several times. Like, the first time, it's just some country bumpkin kind of border guard letting someone in through a gate. And like, oh, Jesus Town's that way. And I assume he's calling it that, like he's calling it the Bible Belt or something. No, that is the literal name. People keep saying the name Jesus Town throughout the movie. We see Gurdjieff, and he's talking about the happy people of Jesus Town. Or these, like, cyberpunk rebels that are going through the city. Like, oh, we've got to stop Jesus Town. It's never a joke. They always say it with 100% seriousness, and I laugh every single time.
Yeah, they really go over the top with the religious themes, and Jesus Town is just the cherry on top of the sundae. I guess that's an important point to make about the movie in general. This is a serious and dramatic film, so as ridiculous as some of these things have sounded and are going to sound, in the movie, it's 100% serious.
Now, what I don't get about all this is, we have this villain Gurdjieff, and it's obvious that he's just really gone into, like, all of his born-again evangelical imagery with the angels, the Jesus Town, all the white. We also later find out that Hakaider is his first attempt at a robotic protector of his city, that he himself built Hakaider, who is just in appearance an evil, satanic-looking robot. He's got an upside-down cross on his chest, for God's sake. So, my question is, why did this guy that's so crazy about his youth group here build a satanic robot in the first place? What was the goal here? What did he think was going to happen with that? See, my personal theory on this is that Gurdjieff was that kid in high school, like, that one that gets really edgy and into Satanism early on, kind of like wanting to scare the other kids or seem like the edgy badass. I think he's that kid, but the one that eventually falls in with the local kind of culty youth group. I'm not saying all youth groups are cults, but you know the ones I'm talking about, like the local culty small town youth group. He falls in with them, finds friends for the first time, and then just kind of goes off the deep end and all the born-again stuff. And then everything he's into starts to be Jesus-related. His Robocop is half Bible man, and his city is actually Jesus Town. So Hakaider is just from a harder phase earlier in his life.
Gurdjieff.
Yeah, exactly.
I can see that. He's still kind of got the hair going on.
Yeah, Hakaider is just the emo or scene version of what eventually would be Michael. I think you're right on there.
So let's get into some of the action and the powers, what really makes up the best parts of this movie.
Yeah, now this is where I feel like the trailer really does the movie justice, and that we get little previews of some of the best action scenes, but I don't want that to make it sound like, oh, once you've seen the trailer, you've seen everything you need to, because this movie's pretty excessive with its action. Like, it's mostly action, not always good action, but it's just going, and the scenes just keep building and escalating. Not always to, like, something bigger and cooler, but they do keep going and keep throwing in new and interesting elements for sure. But, like, I just love how this thing kicks off. Like, our first time we see Hakaider on his bike, he's still in kind of his pretty boy human form that he always starts in. And as he's approaching the city on his Harley-looking motorcycle covered in chains, they start firing turrets at him, and, like, he takes a howitzer to the face. And yeah, there's a little hole in his fleshy bits, revealing that he's an android of some sort, but, like, he doesn't flinch. Like, there's no damage. Some of the bullets are even bouncing off his motorcycle's tires, so he just seems, like, absolutely invincible. And then, yeah, we get to see him take his mechanical form. However, I feel like this was a weird way to start the movie or introduce the character, because, like, he doesn't seem quite that invincible through the rest. Like, in one of our first action scenes, like, he goes from taking cannon fire to the face to running into kind of a van tank, and all of a sudden he's like, oh, I'm in trouble. And, like, he starts running from that. Or, like, we see him kind of worried about some of his forces after about an opening 20 minutes of him just killing everything in his path and taking literally zero damage.
And in that same fight scene with the tank van, he's assaulted by a number of soldiers on dirt bikes. A squad of budget speeder bike soldiers come, and a few of them bump into him while on their bikes, like trying to run him down. And that seems to also do some serious damage, knock him off his feet, disorient him a bit. And it's just a dirt bike tire. And
now I do want to point out how cool I find a lot of the motorcycle-based action scenes in this. Like, they're not always the most impressive effects or choreography, but just, like, seeing Hakaider basically joust a guy off of another motorcycle with his bare hands and then just dragging him as he goes is just incredibly metal. Like, they really established some awesome imagery to sell this character on you real quick, and I kind of can't believe this guy didn't take off earlier, just with how much this seems right up the alley of all the kids I grew up knowing loved Ghost Rider, or I don't know, the Punisher and Venom and Wolverine. Like, this nails those vibes perfectly.
Oh yeah, the fight scenes are so badass in this movie. Even though some of the things are ridiculous, if you just enjoy the scene and just let it happen and take it for what it is a fun ride throughout.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite one of those ridiculous moments is like when they're showing us how powerful Hakaider's shotgun is, which, by the way, I think this movie might be a little influenced by Terminator 2, in that we've got an invincible android on a motorcycle with a classic pump-action shotgun assaulting a city. A few similarities there. But when these dirt bike guys manage to trip Hakaider off of his motorcycle, one of them picks up his discarded gun and tries shooting him with that, which, good thinking, I get that. But instead of doing any damage to Hakaider, instead kicks back and blows the guy's damn arm off. And just like the most wonderful use of a bad prosthetic arm effect.
Actually, the first time I watched the movie, I must have blinked for too long or something. I missed that part. But then on a later rewatch of it, I had to pause the movie because I was laughing for 3 minutes straight after that.
This is one of those movies that, like, part of the reason I've rewatched it so many times is every time I find another one of those, like, blink and you'll miss it, wait, what the fuck moments. That's absolutely one of them. Another one that kind of comes later on that I'm sorry to bury the lead on here, but is maybe one of the most anticlimactic moments in the movie, to the point that I think I repressed this my first time or two through. So, Grant, you know how at the end of the original Star Wars, there's all this intense build-up to the Death Star trench run scene, like Luke has to go through this treacherous battle to get in place to fire the one shot that'll take out the Death Star and save the day?
Of course, it's iconic.
Yeah, well, imagine if instead of doing that, Luke just pulled up in Darth Vader's parking lot, pulled out his shotgun, and without any stormtroopers or any visible resistance coming at him, just shoots at Darth Vader's place of business. And that shotgun bullet, man, does it know exactly where to go, goes right through the lobby doors, down into the secret hallways in the basement, and hits that power cord that'll take out all the knockoff stormtroopers and basically open the way for the rest of the movie. Because that's what happens in Hakaider. Like, we see his lowest moment. Somehow an RPG shot is like the thing that almost kills him among some random small arms fire. We have a touching scene where the love interest slowly has a fever dream, imagining her life with Hakaider as her knight in black armor saving the day. And then we eventually find out that this was all just a dream. She's actually dead. And now Hakaider has all the motivation he needs to go after the bad guy, leading us to this parking lot. So, like, we've already spent a good chunk of the movie showing him on this, like, intense pursuit, infiltrating the city, taking on all these forces. So it just seemed weird to me that, yeah, come our third act, he just pulls up to the parking lot, no forces in the way. And also, these stormtroopers he takes out, like, he gets the core of the building, half of the troopers just kind of fall flat, like, seizing up like the robots. And then there's just more later. Like, I guess it wasn't all of them. So there can still be some cannon fodder as he's eventually gonna face Michael and Gurdjieff one-on-one for the end of the movie.
Yeah, I guess that part does feel kind of unearned, in contrast with all of the other things you mentioned from earlier in the movie, where it seems like he's fighting and winning, but really working for it. Although, maybe that was just because it was the same shotgun that blew that guy's arms off. That sounds like a pretty powerful gun.
Yeah, I suppose that's fair. But I feel like that's the perfect illustration of how this movie is often exactly as cool as you want it to be, and then at other points, not at all as cool as you want it to be, but in just as entertaining of a way. Like, while that moment is dumb as hell, like, I love the movie so much more for it. Like, I think they could have made a cool Death Star trench run kind of scene with it, but, like, I'll take the shot from the Kmart parking lot instead. I take just as much pleasure out of that.
And I guess one good thing about that scene is it does lead us right into the climactic battle between Hakaider and Michael, and I guess later Gurdjieff as well, but that's the longest, loudest, and one of the most badass android fights I've ever seen.
Yeah, one thing you'll notice through the movie is that they almost never skimp on, like, the metallic clang effect every time either Hakaider or Michael literally just takes a step in the movie. And then when they eventually pit these two against each other at the end, it's excessive, and they're literally every time they contact each other or move, like just clang, clang, clang. Like, they got their money's worth out of whatever bell effect they paid for to make this film, because there's no music in this climactic showdown between the two, just the, like, clanging of bells every time they touch fists or lay contact on each other, and, like, it gets pretty grating by the end of this several-minute action scene, but I commend them for committing to the bit.
Yeah, there's no way to forget, especially throughout this part of the movie, that everybody's a robot.
And throughout the movie, we see a lot of weird, like, one-time powers and effects from Hakaider. Like, I know at one point he has a shock touch out of nowhere, but at the end of the movie, it just gets kind of ridiculous. Like, after this long, drawn-out battle, Hakaider loses his gun, is trying to grasp at a bullet, and you think he's just about to be taken out, when all of a sudden, oh no, he's got a super powerful shotgun in his arm that just blows Michael's arm off. And I'm just kind of shocked, like, wait, why didn't you start with that? You've had this in your arm the whole time? Like a gun that'll take out the other invincible android? Where's that been?
Yeah, and it's after he's been, like, seriously injured and looks on the verge of losing. I mean, he's got his arm ripped off at that point. Michael has just been wiping the floor with him. It started off apparently evenly matched, and then he just got beat to hell and pulls that out at the last second.
Oh, and that leads me into another tangent with these final moments. So, after he defeats Michael the first time, we then see him, do the Mortal Kombat fatality, rip out his robot skull and spine. But don't worry, he gets better, because that then goes on to this giant stop-motion Cronenberg robot monstrosity that he then has to fight for round 2. And once Hakaider's getting his butt kicked even worse, we see the upside-down cross on his chest start to flash, which... This is kind of famous Japanese superhero imagery for the hero being in trouble that literally dates back to their first Toku hero in Ultraman. And that Ultraman on his chest has a glowing red light that indicates how much time he has to be a giant, or when he's injured, starts flashing, indicating that he's almost out of time or that he's almost gonna die. And this has been used by a ton of other major Japanese heroes since then. Like, most major robots have that, a lot of other heroes have that. Just the glowing light on the chest is kind of like their equivalent of the Superman logo on the chest. Or just that every hero has some kind of chest logo now because of that. Now, I think it's incredibly metal that Hakaider takes that and makes it an upside-down cross. I then think it's even more metal in this action scene when that upside-down cross opens up to reveal an Iron Giant chest gun and blows the hell out of Michael 2.0 with it. So, good job, movie. You made the coolest thing I've ever seen. You did it.
So after this climactic battle with Michael, which really is the high point of action in the movie, we get a conflict between Hakaider and Gurdjieff, kind of the resolution fight.
Yeah, and what I love about this is, like, after Gurdjieff literally sees Hakaider kill Michael and then kill a stronger Michael, he just pulls out, like, a little, like, a tiny revolver. Not a massive elephant gun or something like that. Like, nah, just a fancy, ornate pistol. The bullets just ricochet right off Hakaider. And, like, that was his ace in the hole? Like, a little gun?
Yeah.
He doesn't even save a bullet for himself or anything like that. He's just like, okay, this'll do.
I thought
not a magic gun. Good.
I thought the same thing. Like, if your solution to an invincible robot bent on killing you is a 22 6-shooter, maybe just fire 5.
Yeah, and then, like, our final pull of power out of nowhere moment is, like, Hakaider turns his back, says, "You're not even worth killing." Despite spending the previous 85 minutes of movie killing his way through a city to do just that, turns his back. Gurdjieff takes this moment to try and take him out one last time with another gun, and Hakaider just crosses the room in the blink of an eye with some super speed we've never seen before, and punches the feathers right out of Gurdjieff.
Oh, that's one other hilarious thing about this movie is, with the exception of one character, everyone's blood is feathers. I don't know why. I don't know if it's part of the crazy religious themes that they're trying to tie in, or if they just ran out of blood after that one scene, but yeah, everybody's full of feathers.
Yeah, even the robots, like, sometimes they'll collapse in blood, but, like, we see Hakaider line up two of them, get back-to-back headshots on two lined up in a line, and yeah, just explode in feathers, like all of his villains are made of pillows or something.
So this brings us to our final thoughts on this movie.
I've got to say, like, what I think really endears this film to me is that this is the movie I've always wanted and just didn't realize existed. Like, for one, this throwing together Robocop, Terminator, and Power Rangers all into one, like, this is exactly the film my 14-year-old self would have made based on everything he thought was cool. And on top of this, like, I've noticed this theme in, like, Terminator and Predator, like, just kind of unstoppable pursuit monster style movies that, like, I'm sick of them going after the little guy. I want to see that movie with them coming up against, like, an Elon Musk or a Jeff Bezos. Like, hey, what happens when Terminator's going against someone that has all of the resources possible? And this is pretty much that. Like, it's a knockoff Terminator going up against, literally a dystopian dictator with an army of stormtroopers. And I'm like, yeah, well, we didn't make that movie, so thank you, Japan, for taking all our cool ideas and themes and making the movie we didn't. I wish we had stuck by this and promoted this more in America.
I really love this movie. I guess the way I describe it to friends is that it's a great bad movie. Like, it's a little low budget, but the things that they do right, and then some things they do so over the top and so ridiculous that it just makes it a great time to watch. And surprisingly, it has a really good rewatch value too. There are things that you'll be so busy laughing or maybe not paying attention at the right second that you'll miss something kind of funny or kind of cool that happens. And each time you watch it, you might pick up on something new. Additionally, each time you watch something that you do remember, it's still funny. Like, every time they say Jesus Town, you can't help but laugh.
Yeah, and I think you got it right on the head there, that this is the perfect kind of bad movie to watch. Like, I'm not sure if I've ever watched this one completely sober. Like, this is a great one to have over drinks or other things. But, like, I kind of can't believe there hasn't been a riff tracks or Mystery Science Theater about this, to my knowledge, because it's the perfect type of movie to watch and make fun of with your friends. Like, the perfect amount of bad yet incredibly entertaining, which is exactly what you want out of a B movie.
Yeah, I think one thing that makes this a little bit harder for people to enjoy is that it's a little obscure. Like, I don't know anybody who's heard of it, and I wouldn't know where to stream this.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm someone who's loved this stuff for pretty much all my life, and didn't know about it till this year. So I guess for those of you like me who are only just discovering this, do know that, one, there is the sketchy version of this on YouTube that's probably not legal, so maybe don't watch that one. Thankfully, though, there is a free version of this out there on the streaming service Tubi TV. Pretty good for free services. You don't even need to create an account to use it. I think they have apps on most devices. It does have commercials, but low-key, this is the kind of movie that you can use a commercial break for. It's kind of nice to be able to get up and get a drink during. There's plenty of places you can watch this for free, or, like, I think this would be a fun one to be able to put on your shelf if you can track down a DVD. While it's not the most well-known, it's definitely one of the more accessible Toku films like this that I can share with people.
Yeah, and I do want to shout out Tubi TV. I don't use it myself, but I've watched some things on it with you when we were hanging out, and I have the version of Hulu with commercials. Tubi TV has less commercials than Hulu, and it's totally free. I mean, they don't have as many, recent or currently airing TV shows, but there's a lot of good stuff on Tubi, and it doesn't feel like an enormous amount of advertising to watch those things.
Yeah, and I believe it's Tubi, among with some of the other free ones you can get out there, that have a surprisingly decent Toku lineup on there. Like, you can find some old Super Sentai shows, maybe a couple Kamen Riders, or even Ultramen if you're lucky. So yeah, if you're a Toku fan, just want to get a good smattering of what was out there from mostly their older content for sure. Like, you can find a really good selection of it on free streaming services. And really, Toku fans have not been that lucky for maybe ever, at least in the US, as far as being able to track down and find old Toku shows and movies.
So for those of us who have watched Mechanical Violator Hakaider and want something similar, do you have any recommendations?
I mentioned at the top, and have mentioned in previous episodes, Psycho Gorman, which I can definitely see the influence of this movie there, because Psycho Goreman is basically just if Hakaider got distracted by 2 billion Mandy-style kids along the way. So yeah, just playing up a very similar character with very similar villains that also are kind of angelic in appearance and with a lot of Toku props and scenery, and just instead making a very over-the-top, ridiculous indie comedy out of it that I probably will want to cover on here sometime. But I think before I get to that, I'd like to talk about one that's a little bit more up the alley of traditional Toku fans, and that would be Biosuit Guyver, which I think is actually a much more well-known movie than Hakaider, and it's known as being kind of the body horror Toku movie. I know its transformations can get kind of messed up, and it's definitely got a cult following, but it's one of the big major Toku films that I see a lot of references to, that I've just never gotten around to watching. I really would like to do an episode on that sometime in the near future. And finally, I believe I recommended this in our Kamen Rider episode, but their 90s film, Kamen Rider Z-O, is actually pretty close to Hakaider, just a bit more toned down and definitely more streamlined in its focus. I mean, it's taken a Kamen Rider style figure like this, waking up in the middle of nowhere, just going on his big quest, fighting a very Terminator-like monster, culminating in a stop-motion giant fight at the end. They're very similar movies, but this one's only like 45 minutes long, a little more family-friendly, maybe not totally family-friendly, but yeah, very enjoyable experience. So if you don't have 88 minutes to dedicate to this, maybe dedicate 45 minutes to Kamen Rider instead.
Yeah, and I'd like to second that recommendation of Psycho Goreman. I've seen this a few times now, and it's an over-the-top, absurd comedy with a lot of great Toku elements and a fantastic soundtrack.
I think that'll bring our episode to a close, but if any of our listeners have Toku recommendations of their own they'd like us to check out, you can send them our way on social media. You can find us on the Giant Sized Violence Facebook page, on Twitter as @UltraMegaCast, or email us at giantsizedviolence@gmail.com. We'd like to thank you for giving our podcast a chance and give a special shout out to artists Ray Day Parade and Dark Moon Home Video for designing our logo and cover photos. Our intro and outro music is You're an Ace Kid by Demon Dice from their album Alcatraz. You can check out their new EP, Shut Up, Get Happy, on iTunes and Spotify. We hope you join us again in our upcoming episodes where we'll be looking into the final issue of the series so far, as well as some of the movies and shows this comic draws influence from. Until then, take care and remember to do your part in preventing the spread of the kaiju virus.
Freedom can't be seen by downcast eyes. So raise your gaze until your death beats all. And shake your fist to the sky. Refuse to higher, let them make you small. Cause they love just to see you convinced you're just a brick in the wall. But you're not just a brick in the wall. La da 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 da.
Jesus Town.